Hey guys, welcome back to Algos Explained. I'm David Kim, and today we have another algorithm question. This time is a little more challenging than the ones you've been seeing on my channel. Not in terms of like I'm not sure how to explain it, but this one just I felt like as I was solving it, it took different steps, and even after I was in the middle of solving it one way, I realized there was a better way to do it, and just decided to go with the better way. What I have behind me is that the last solution that I thought of, and so we'll get right to it. Of course, uh, after I read the question, if you want to go ahead and try it out yourself, just pause the video and feel free to solve it, and then come back and listen to the explanation or whatnot. Maybe just to even compare answers if you did successfully solve it. But here it is. We have two objects. We're given two objects, that's the input, and the output is going to be an array of identical value keys in their own array. So that's kind of a mouthful, but what it essentially means is um, an array of identical values keys. So in an object, there's keys and values. So if the values are the same, we want their keys. So pretty much in our output, we want the keys, not the values. But how are you going to determine which keys to get? Well, if there are identical values, either within the same object or within two different objects, we want those we want those keys, and we want them in their own array. So it's not just going to be one whole array of all these keys that had similar values. It's going to be an array, and arrays of kind of like clumped. Okay, this group of arrays pointed to this value. This array with these keys in it, they pointed to this value. And so hopefully that was enough to understand it. If it wasn't, here's an example. We have two objects here, object one, object two, and these are the keys and those are the values. Um, you might, if you don't know too much about objects, the keys will always be unique, but the values can be kind of the same, or well, it can be the same. Um, and we're going to be taking advantage of that in our code. If we have a key and a value, A goes to 1, B goes to 2, there's no repeating, there's no values that are repeated there, so that alone, we won't really have an output. But of course, we're given two objects, and so we're going to look at the second one, and this key apple points to 1, this key cat points to the value 2, this key hat points to the number 18. And of course, these keys and values can pretty much be anything. They could even be more objects, arrays, stuff like that. And so what's going to happen here is, well, we're looking at the keys and the values. We want our output to have keys, but we're looking at values to determine that. And so when we look at the values which is on the right side, we'll take a look, 1 and 1. So A and apple, they are pointing to a value that is identical. And so we want to clump those together in one array and throw it in our output array. And the same thing goes with B and cat. They are both pointing to the value 2. And so we want B and we want cat kind of to be in one array, which is separate from the A and apple. And we want to output that in an array. And so this is our output right here. This is the outer array. This is a 2D array, outer array that has arrays inside. If it had arrays of arrays of arrays, that'd be a 3D array. And of course, if you just go more, it's 4D, 5D, whatnot. But yeah, here is our output. A and apple, they pointed to the value 1, and so we put them together. B and cat pointed to the value 2, and so we put them together. And before we continue with the solution, I'm just going to warn you, I feel like this is going to be a long video, just because there was a lot of steps that I took to getting this, and I want to thoroughly go over it, especially when I come across one of these questions where I'm headed one direction, and I realize, okay, there's a better way to do it. I want to share those moments with you, so that maybe you can skip that initial phase of kind of doing kind of the long-winded solution. But of course, if you want to go with the long-winded one and kind of that's what you're used to, I would suggest do what you can. But in the middle of it, if you think of a better solution, 99% of the time, the interviewer probably has an idea of how to solve the problem themselves. And if you can match kind of what they're expecting of you, then things will turn out better. Okay, so So we understand our question now. We have two objects. That's our parameters, our arguments, and we are going to pretty much their objects. We're going to look at not just the keys but the values, and then with the values, we're going to determine which keys to kind of clump together and throw in our output array. And so, how do we do that? Initially, I was thinking, okay, if we're looking at two objects, well, then I'm going to have to make a list of their keys. I was thinking, okay, how am I going to kind of compare which keys are equal? The first route I was taking, and the route that you might be taking also, it was kind of I'll go through this first object and I'll collect the values and I'll make that into an array. And there are different ways to do that. You can go through the object with a for loop, or you can use object.values, which is not supported everywhere, so you might want to watch out for that. Yeah, so first I was thinking I would go through the object and I would collect the values. Same thing with this, I would collect the values and I would pretty much filter them to make them unique. And there are also other ways to do that, which I won't be going into. But that was my idea. I was going to collect an array of the values, then compare those two arrays, and then I was going to, as I was iterating through like these objects again, I would say, okay, if that object had that, now I have an array of the values. If this object has a key that points to a value inside this array, I would kind of throw it into another array that I would hold on to until it was full, and then spit it out. Putting it into this output array. But you might already tell that's a long-winded solution. It has the potential to work, but I feel like it's not the best way to do it. And I felt like in the middle of it, I thought of a different solution, which is what we're going to talk about right now. So we went ahead and called this function get repeat value keys because we are going to get the keys of repeated values. And so, of course, it takes into two arguments, object 1 and object 2. You could call these whatever you want. And this is in JavaScript. We're using a lot of ES6 here. We're going to have two data structures that's going to hold our information. We're going to have an object and we're going to have an array. And kind of the idea behind this solution is we are going to just go ahead and flip it. As you can tell by this this name here, flipped object, we're going to take advantage of the fact that the key has to be unique. The value doesn't have to be unique, but the key does. And so why does that matter? Well, if we're looking at 1, let's take a look at kind of our output right here. What does this point to? It points to 1. What does this point to? It points to 2. And not just the numbers, we're talking about the values. They could have been anything as long as they were equal. As long as A and Apple both pointed to, if they both point to the string Bob as its value, then we would still have it like this, but it would have pointed to Bob. The important thing is that we're utilizing the fact that objects, their keys have to be unique. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take that key, or take the value, and we're going to make it into a key. And so every time we see that, we're going to kind of throw that into an array, and we're going to spit that array out. I feel like just saying it in words kind of it might be a little difficult to get through across this screen. So we're going to walk through this how I coded it, and then we're going to go through a problem. And I feel like as we're walking through the problem, it might really click in if maybe you didn't come to this solution yourself, or if it hasn't clicked in yet. And so yeah, here's the code. We have a flipped object and we have repeat value keys. And so pretty much this is our output array. We're not really dealing with that until way back over here. And this might look a little weird. I just didn't have enough space to go all the way down. So all this bit of code it would have been down here had my board been longer. And so this ending paren or curly is this one right here, the one that starts here. And so, okay, let's go ahead and get started with this code. We still have to go and look at our object 1 and object 2 because we still have to walk through them. There's no way of getting by that. And so if, you can tell this bit of code looks very similar to this with a little bit of a difference. And they're essentially doing the exact same thing. What we're going to do is we're going to use this format, the for loop, to walk through this object. And we're using for let key in object. This key, that's just a variable. It can be anything. In object, that has to be the object you're walking through. And so this is the same right here. This chunk and this chunk, as you can see, let key. It doesn't matter. We could use a variable again. But the object that we're going to walk through now, here's object 2, here's object 1. That does matter. So pretty much what we're doing is we're going to take advantage, like I said, of the fact that object keys need to be unique. And so what's happening here? We're checking flipped object, that's our object, does it have the object 1 key? And so when I do this right here, this is kind of one entity. It is looking at the value. One way to tap into the value of an object is pretty much doing the dot or the square brackets. Object, you can do this. Object 1 of A, and that'll give you the value. That'll give you 1. Or you can do object 1 dot A, and that'll give you the value. And so what we're doing here is we're pretty much, that is just to give us the value. And so we're just checking, okay, does this flipped object have this, whatever part of the object we're on, whether it's this one or this one, has it seen that key before? And that's important whether it has or not, because we're looking for repeated ones. And if it has, then we're going to push it into this array. But if it hasn't, this is kind of flipped. If it hasn't seen that yet, then we're going to go ahead and put it into an array here. So see how I just made that equal to that? That's one way. That's another way to set a value. If we had this bit of code here and we just made it equal to 21, then now this value of 1 would be changed. Of course, we're not going to do that. It has nothing to do with what we're trying to do. What we want to do is we're trying to define flipped object. Right now it's empty. It started out empty, and so we need to start filling it up with information. And the information we're going to fill it up with is making the values the keys and kind of putting them into an array. And this helps us at the end, because in the end we do want to be already kind of packaged. And you'll see what I mean by that in just a little bit. So flipped object of, and we're this bracket right here is tapping into this object. It's saying, do you have this key, which is going to be the value of whatever we're looking at. And if it doesn't, well, this right here showed, okay, I guess one thing that I do have to mention is if it doesn't have it in there, then it's just going to be undefined. And that's another thing we're taking advantage of. If flipped object taps into something, right now it's empty, so of course it's going to be undefined. For that reason, undefined is a falsy value, so we're going to go into the else part of this if statement, and we're going to stick that key inside an array. Next time you see that value again, we're going to push it into it because we already have this array created. And if you try to push it in without having an array created, then you're going to get an error. So similar thing going on here. This might be a little cleaner for you guys. What I did was I just used a variable here. Just like I said, doing this taps into the value. We decided, okay, we're going to set the variable called value, and we're going to do object 2 of key. That's pretty much tapping into the value. And this time what we're going to do, well, not this time, but it might be a little cleaner to see here. Same thing, flipped object. We're still looking at the same object. We're just like compiling it to one big one. And we're saying, okay, have you seen this value yet? And that's important because see right here, by the time we're done with the first object, say we're using this example, it's going to have 1 as the key, A in an array, 2 as the key, and B in an array. And now when it sees the 1, it is going to have seen that 1 already. The 1 is going to already be a key in here. So it's not going to go into, it's going to go into this first if. It's going to return a value that is true. Well, it's not going to return true, but it's going to return a value. So a value being truthy, it is going to go into this section of the if, and pretty much is going to push the key into the array that it already had. The array that it had was an array that contained A. It's going to push Apple into it, and we'll walk through it again later. Pretty much that's what happens. If it hasn't seen it before, then it's going to create a value with an array. And at the end here, we're doing another loop inside an object. This time we're looping inside flipped object. You can notice how we're using the variable key again, just because it's very clear what it is. Let key in flipped object. Sometimes you can change it to kind of what else you want it to be. Sometimes it makes more sense to use different variable names, but by default, key is a good choice to go with. Flipped object is going to be now pretty much filled with everything. It's going to be filled with everything because we went through the object 1, we went through object 2, and now we're going through the flipped object. And what we're going to do is, how do we know if something was pointing to two things? It was A pointing to 1, was apple pointing to 1. Hat was pointing to an 18, which wasn't repeated anywhere, and so we don't want stuff like that. We only want things that were repeated at least twice. Repeated once. I think repeated once because repeated means that there was something there. But yeah, hat was never repeated, or the value 18, more importantly, that was never repeated. So hat, we don't want that in our output. See, our output doesn't have hat, and so what we're doing here is pretty much checking for that. Again, I didn't use this setting variable for value. If it helps you kind of understand what's going on, I highly recommend it. Setting values to help create cleaner code, that's always a good thing, but just showing you different ways to do it, and that tapping into an object like this, it still works. And so right here, we're iterating through the flipped object, and we're checking, okay, now we're checking the value of the key and checking the length. Is it greater than 1? If it is, then we're going to push it into our output array, which was repeat value keys. So if the length is greater than 1, repeat value keys dot push, and we're pushing in that value, which is going to be an array. The key is just key, and when we do flipped object of key, that's going to give us the value, which was, we were storing arrays as values, and so it's going to push an array into this array, forming that 2D array that we do want. And at the end of it, after we're done going through flipped object, we're going to return repeat value keys, and we're done. Whew, all right. That was a lot to go through. If you understood that completely, that is very good. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. But if you want to watch me walk through this example, stick around. I'm going to do that right now. So what's going to happen is, or I guess it's best to walk through this code with this example, and we're just going to go step by step what's happening, what flipped object looks like at what point, or repeat value looks like pretty much when we get over here. And we'll be walking through that because very likely, or it's highly likely, that once you write code like this, they're going to ask you, okay, walk through it for me. They're going to ask you that. And so you're going to want to be able to not just create the solution, but also really define what's happening to the variables you created, the data structures you created at each step of the code. And so let's go ahead and do that right now. I don't know how much time passed already, but like I said, this is going to be one of the longer ones. I feel like all of my videos are kind of long though. So, all right, let's look at this. We have object 1 and object 2, and we're going to go with these. And you know what? What we're going to do is okay, let's change hat to 1. And so this is going to be a little different. How about this? We'll add another value here just to be a little more different. We're going to do how about this? Bat. This is hat, bat, and this is going to be a 3. So that one, we already know that one's not going to be in our output array because the value hasn't been repeated anywhere. We can just see from looking at our arguments right now, 1 has been repeated, so we're going to want to clump A, apple, and hat together. B has been repeated, so we want to clump B and cat together. Let's go ahead and figure out what's happening in each line of this code. So our flipped object, and I'm going to just cross that out. Okay, this is our area of code. Okay, flipped object, flip object, FO. that is going to be an empty array or empty object for now. Repeat value keys, that's going to be a empty array. So repeat RVK, and that is just an array. That's not, we already know that's not going to be touched until way later. So let's go ahead and figure out what's going on here. We're going to the for loop, and so for key in object one being this guy right here, we're going to check, okay, is flipped object of object one key, is there anything in there? Well, there's nothing in there right now. Pretty much they're asking FO of the first key, object of key we're looking at, object of key, the first one is a 1. So is 1 a key in FO? There is nothing in FO, so that is undefined. So of course, that's undefined. We're going to go into this else and we're going to create this. Flipped object of 1 equals key. So right now, our flipped object, and what we'll do is we will just get rid of that and we'll just expand this. So we just created this right now. Flipped object of that. So that was a value. So what was the value? Object 1 of key. Object 1 of key, which was A, is 1. So now that 1 points to the key, which is the A. But you notice we're putting it inside of an array. And so that happens. It's probably a string also. And so boom, that just happened right there. Terrible curly brace. And so that happened right now. Flipped object of object, so we just created that. Object 1 of key was 1, and we made that equal to an array that contained A. And so now we go on to the next key, which is B. That's our key. And so we are going to check, okay, FO of, let's see. Well, the key is B, but we're checking, okay, flipped object of object tapped into the B. So that is going to be, if we're looking at OBJ of 1, or no, sorry. If we're looking at OBJ of A, that's 1. OBJ of B, that is 2. And so since we're doing flipped object of OBJ of key, we're looking at, we stuck this inside here, so we're looking at this value 2. So boom, we're looking at 2. Does FO have a 2? Well, no, it only has a 1 right now. That's the only thing we put in there. So we're going to go down to this else because it asked it to give it something and it returned undefined. That's what it returns. When you tap into a key in an object that's not existent, it's going to be undefined. And one thing that I do want to warn you about doing this method is if you have values that that point to a 0. Right now we have only values that are going to point to an array, so that's going to be truthy. But if at this step you're adding numbers in for whatever reason, this probably might be for a different question. If you're putting in numbers and if you put in a 0 and you're checking, okay, does something point to the number and it happens to point to 0, 0 is falsy, so that might not work in your favor. You're probably going to have to do something else there. But getting back on topic, pretty much it checked, okay, if it's asking, okay, tap into that, pretty much FO of 2, and give me what it returned. It returned undefined, that's falsy, so we're going to this else, and we're creating object 1 of key, which is object 1 of key, that's 2, we're looking at the 2. 2 is equal to that array, or yeah. So we expand this, comma, 2 is going to point to an array, and the key, what was the key? The key was B. All right, and so that concludes our first object iteration, or iterating through that first object. And now let's go to the second one, OBJ2. We're looking at that now. So let key in OBJ2. We have a value, so let's go ahead and use that. Value equals OBJ2 of key. What's our first key is Apple, and OBJ2 of Apple, what is that? That's 1. So our value is 1 right now. We're asking, okay, flipped object. If flipped object of 1, if that exists, and you know what that returns? That returns A now. And so that's the truthy value. So we're going to go into this section of the if statement. And so now what you're going to do is we're going to take that value, which was, or no, we're not going to take that value. We're going to take FO of value. So we're going to take that and we're going to push into here. We're going to push into here the key. And the key was apple. And so we're going to push into here apple. So let's go ahead and expand this a little bit. Let's rewrite this. We're going to have 2 here, and that had, of course, B in it. Let's go ahead and end that. And right now we just pushed in apple. Okay, cool. And so let's keep track of key. Let's keep track of value. And of course, FO of whatever we're looking at. And so now we finished that. We were in that part of the if statement. We ended it. We're going to the next key. The next key is cat. Next key is cat. The value is object 2 of cat. Object 2 of cat is 2. So we're looking at that. And now we're going to ask, okay, flipped object of value. So flipped object of 2, what does that return? That returns an array that holds B inside of it. And so now, is that truthy or falsy? That's truthy. So we're going to go into that section of the if statement, and we're going to pretty much do flipped object of value dot push the key. And so flipped object of value, that's that. So we're going to push into here. We're going to push here the key, which was cat. And so right in here, cat. There we go. Cool. And so we ended that. We're going to the next key. Next key is hat. Key hat. What's the value? The value is object 2 of key. Object 2 of key hat is 1. And so what we're going to do is flipped object of the value. Flipped object of 1. That returns to us A and apple. My writing is getting messier and messier. I apologize. So, like we're going to check, okay, flipped object of value, flipped object of value. It was an array that we got back that's truthy. We're going to go into that section of the if statement, and we're going to push into it the key. We're going to push into it hat. So hat goes in there. Hat. After that, we're going to the next key. We do have a 4th key now, which is the 3, and or it's the bat. The bat. And so let's go ahead and do that. Key, the last key is bat. And what is the value? Object 2 of bat, that points to a 3. So we're going to ask for a 3. Does flipped object value have a key that is 3? 1, 2, it doesn't have a 3, that's undefined. So what it'll do is it'll create it. This is how it's created. Object of value equals something. This now, instead of equaling undefined, it equals the key bat inside of here. And so we extended our object by another. So now let's go ahead and erase some of this. Now 3, the key 3 points to bat. And that is now the end of our flipped object. That was the last key that we're going to look at. We finished this loop now. And so now we're on to the next bit of code, which is right over here. Cool. And so now, okay, now we're going to go through this flipped object. We have our flipped object. Let's take a look at it. It has 3 keys, 1, 2, and 3. And it has, they all have values. Arrays, A, apple, hat, B, cat, and bat. And so let's go ahead and let's just stop here and look at what we want from this. Well, we know that the objective was to have an array of arrays of keys whose values were repeated. See, one was repeated, this value, 1 was repeated, 1 was repeated, 1 was repeated right here 3 times. And so we want to collect together A, apple, and hat. Luckily, we already have that. Same thing with 2, it was repeated, so we want to clump in B and cat together. 3 was not repeated, we don't want that. And a good way to see it is, well, if it was repeated, that array would have more than 1 in it. And so that's the logic we put in here. Flipped object of key, which is pretty much, let's go ahead and do that here too. So flipped object of key is going to be 1, 2, and 3. Is it greater than that, greater than 1? So let's see. FO of 1 is equal to this. A, apple, and hat. What is the length? Length is 3. Length is 3. It definitely is greater than 1. And so it'll push into our value keys, which is repeat value keys. That is an array, and we're going to throw into there this array, apple and hat. Let's put some quotations there. And for now, it only has that. And now we're going to go to the next one. Next key is 2. We're going to look at that. We're looking at B and cat. B and cat. That length equals 2. And yeah, it is greater than that, so we're going to go ahead and push it in here too. So let's go ahead and push it in here. Just going to do a comma there. B and cat. Great. Now we have another key, so let's go ahead and look at that key. Our last key is 3, and it has bat in it. That is a length of 1. And 1 is not greater than 1, so we... Hey guys, so at this point the camera cut out on me, and it skipped some footage, so I decided just to do a voiceover. At this point we're all done with the question. Bat has a length of 1, which proves that the value 3 was never repeated, and so it rightfully does not get included in our repeat value keys array, which leads us to the right answer. And so yeah, one other thing that I do mention here is that perhaps maybe there was a twist, and maybe the repeat had to be between the two objects. Say you take out the A and the 1, well, the 1 repeats in object 2, the value 1, it repeats in object 2, but would we want that? And the point of me bringing that up is, say there is a twist that could be given to you. If you notice that, if you can foresee that, is it's your best move to kind of mention that and kind of get a precise answer to those little curveballs that might be thrown at you. Other than that, I really value these videos going over objects, simply because once you start making API calls, most likely you're going to be dealing with JSON objects, and as the more you're comfortable with going through objects, parsing through them, and being able to pull information, understanding how it's created and stuff like that, the better or the easier it's going to be for you dealing with these things. And so yeah, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and thanks for tuning in with us today. Have a good one.